Chapter 31, Disillusionment. We left about a week after agreeing to assassinate Solas. We spent a few days practicing discussion points on how we could convince Solas to put his cause aside. The practice was futile, of course. No matter what we believed, we were determined to take Solas down. We were on the road with a large contingent of dwarves, soldiers, and craftsmen, as well as the Templars, and a smaller elven force of mages and warriors. With us were a large number of carts of masonry and carpentry supplies, all to push the narrative of repairing Skyhold's foundations. The trip through the mountains was easy enough since my scouts and other dwarven caravans bringing supplies to Skyhold had mapped the smoothest course. I also used my Titan abilities to mold the path to be smooth and true for us. Still, the trip took a few weeks. During the days, we mostly sang marching songs and talked casually while enjoying the scenery. When evening came, we continued our meeting practice. Each time we practiced, we got more and more into the details and came up with more ideas to better convince Solas. Triana and Alfric seemed to fall more and more into the belief that we might be able to genuinely convince him to stop. I wanted to break them of that illusion, but it occurred to me that their sincere hope in the possibility would make them more convincing. We arrived close to Skyhold just before sunset. I had no doubt that our campfires were easily seen from the keep. Our numbers were so large that the light from the camps lit the mountainside as it reflected off of the snow. That evening, we gathered together one last time. We should have stopped earlier, further away from the keep so as not to alert them, Serena contemplated as we sat near a fire to keep ourselves warm. They'll likely have known we were coming for some time, Merrick countered. Their scouts have probably been reporting our position for the last day or so. I was bundled up in thick clothes and a thicker blanket to stave off the biting cold. Your Grace is correct, and they're scouting around the camp as we speak. Is that your stone sense kicking in? Elfric asked. I laughed and shook my head. That's not what stone sense is. No, my Titan senses are honed around the mountains. I can feel the vibrations of everything going on for some distance now. These vibrations have been staying ahead of us, and now more have joined them from Skyhold's direction. We're being watched, but I doubt they'll attack. What makes you so sure? Farron asked as he looked around with some concern. They're keeping their distance, I replied. They're too far away for any weapon to reach. I'd wager that they're counting our numbers and seeing if we're preparing for an attack. Well, Triana said with a smile, we don't have to worry about that, do we? Only the camp guards and a few of our personal guards are even armed or armored. They shouldn't see much of a threat. Don't be too sure, Marek cautioned. They see an army on their doorstep. Armored or not, an army is still an army. And an unsolicited army rarely implies good intentions. They would be fools to not be prepared for us to attack. Farron hummed in agreement. Your Grace is correct again. If I were in charge of Skyhold's defenses right now, I would be preparing to turn that bridge into a killing field. We may be many, but that bridge turns our numbers into a disadvantage. We'll be packed in tight if we try to storm the place. Then it's a good thing we don't plan on storming the keep, isn't it? Serena chided. In any case, if they're keeping their distance, we shouldn't pay them any mind. Let them believe we don't know they're here. They can report our numbers and nothing more. If some, or all of them, go missing, the rest will know we're not here with peaceful intentions. Well considered, sister, Kalon chimed in. I think you're right. Best to be seen as peaceful as we can, despite our numbers. To that end, we should consider how we will approach the keep tomorrow, Serena said as she looked at us. I thought we'd send a rider ahead to let them know who we are and why we're here. Farron answered in a way that suggested the answer should be obvious. A single rider to represent all of our people? Triana asked. Why not send one for each? It only takes one person to relay a message, Farron countered. And if the one doesn't come back, then we've only lost one person, not three. As for my opinion, Marek interrupted as he warmed his hands near the fire, I believe Triana, Alfric, Princess Merida, and I should ride up. We can speak with whoever meets us and sue for entry. Serena's expression seemed to sour when she wasn't counted among those Marek suggested but quickly composed herself. Without any protection, it wouldn't do to let our leaders go up alone. I can keep us safe, I assured Serena. Besides, I doubt that they would be foolish enough to attack us. If they did, all of our people would go to war with them. She's right, Farron agreed. As much as I don't like the idea of letting her go without me, if, somehow, the dwarves didn't simply rush in and kill everyone, we could lay siege to the place and starve them out. Or we could simply wait until the armies of Ferelden and Ostagar arrived and take the keep then. That's why I enjoy dwarves so much, Merrick laughed and smiled at us. They have a practical sense of things. And we're raised from birth to put our people above ourselves, I added with no small amount of pride. Practical and honorable, Alistair smiled. He leaned over and rested his hand on Serena's shoulder. We can wait with our forces until you all return, but it might be better to ask that at least some of your guards be allowed entry as well, at least during the talks. Of course, Merrick and I answered in unison. That brought a laugh from everyone to see us both answer as the one assuming they were in charge. The rest of the evening was spent talking idly, singing, and reminiscing on times past. By the time we retired for the evening, everyone was in high spirits. Farron was escorting me back to my tent when Serena stopped us. Merida, can we speak? Farron and I stopped to regard her. I looked at Farron and nodded, signaling that he could go ahead. I looked back at Serena and adjusted the blanket I still had around me to rest more comfortably around my shoulders. What is it, Serena? I was hoping to get out of this cold. I apologize, Serena said as she gave an apologetic bow of her head. However, I was wondering if you'd given any thought to our last conversation. Have you considered helping me? I gave a slightly annoyed huff and stood a bit straighter. I have considered your request. Frankly, I think you and Honora are likely equally capable in your ability to lead. You lean more toward improving infrastructure, while she leans more toward diplomacy and alliance building. I would wager Alistair is the more capable leader between the two brothers. Kaelin is kind, but not as decisive as Alistair can be when push comes to shove. Serena brightened up after hearing my conclusion. So you'll help me in my bid for the throne. I looked up at Serena with a stern expression. Don't push me into a decision, Serena. We are friends, but a move like this requires subtle maneuvering and decisive timing. When I make a move to endorse your efforts, you'll know. This is a matter you shouldn't rush, and rather have faith in me that I will aid you. Her expression sobered as she looked down at me. Understanding slowly came to her, and she nodded. Of course. You're right, Merida. I've done my part, and I should trust you to do yours. I apologize for trying to push the issue. I offered as graceful a curtsy as I could beneath the blanket. It's fine, Serena. I agreed to help you, and I will. The first step will happen soon enough once this is all over with. Serena's smile returned to her. Thank you, Merida. Now I leave you to your tent and your warmth. Till tomorrow. Till tomorrow, then, I replied, and turned to make my way to my tent. The next day, King Merrick, Triana, and Alfric and I gathered together after breakfast. Merrick was dressed in a splendid blue and white outfit with a thick coat. Triana wore a green and black dress with a willowy shawl that seemed to stop the cold somehow. Alfric wore a matching suit to Triana's, but wore a long leather coat lined with thick cloth. I was dressed in a gambeson gown of my favorite garnet with polished brass buttons and a thick fur coat with a hood that covered my head. Our mounts were bridled in fine regalia. None of us carried a weapon on us. Are we prepared? King Marek asked as we moved into a simple formation with Merrick and myself in the center, and Triana and Alfric flanking us on either side. Ready as we'll ever be, I said chipperly. Let's hope for the best, Triana smiled. When you're ready, King Merrick, we can depart. Merrick bowed his head and turned his horse to start toward the keep with the rest of us following. It took us several minutes to approach the start of the bridge, where a few dozen armed elves were waiting for us with weapons at the ready. We pulled our mounts to a stop a few yards from the group of elves. One of the elves stepped forward, and with an authoritative voice asked, What brings an army to Skyhold? Merrick looked at me, and I simply nodded to suggest he could respond first. He looked back at the elf. We are no army. I am King Merrick of Ferelden. With me is Princess Merida Orodum of Orzammar, as well as Lady Triana and Lord Alfric of Ostagar. We have come to speak with Solas. You say you are no army, yet you number in the thousands, the elf countered. Forgive me, your grace, but would that not constitute an army if it were outside one of your cities? It was my turn to explain things. The dwarves are my fault. My people consider me precious to them and insisted that I was escorted by a part of our army to keep me safe. I tried to convince them that this wasn't necessary, but the assembly would hear none of it. So I've come with this delegation while bringing the craftsmen and supplies to repair Skyhold's foundation as I promised. Solas, I would. The army is here by decree of the assembly. I apologize if they concerned you. The elf considered my explanation for some time. We have been waiting for the supplies, Princess. We're pleased that you've delivered them. I hope you can forgive our readiness and concern. I bowed my head. There's nothing to forgive. I can understand how concerning the sight of us would be. My friends and I would like to speak with Solas while the repairs are underway. We're hoping that we can take some time and discuss everyone's position on his desires and possibly work with him to come to a peaceful solution. I will not stop you and these others from entering, Princess, the elf replied. Lord Solas has insisted that the leaders of the approaching force be allowed in to parley. When he finds out that it's you, he'll no doubt be more relaxed. May we ask that our personal guards be allowed in as well? Triana asked. There are a few dozen for each of us. They can set up a camp in the courtyard so no elves are put out for the duration. Of course, my lady, the elf responded. I'll see that room is made for them. The rest of the gathered forces will need to remain out here until it's time for you to leave. I hope you understand we don't have the room for that many people. Certainly, Merrick was quick to agree. As the princess has explained, they were sent by the Orzammar assembly. Princess Merida has her own personal guard. The army will do as commanded and wait for our return. And if you don't mind, I'll have the wagons with the materials and craftsmen come in as well so the repairs can get started, I said with a bright smile. That will be fine, Princess, the elf said. Why don't you all head into the keep and I'll have one of my men send for the others? Thank you, my friend. Merrick bowed his head and stirred his horse forward. We followed behind him. The bridge that led to Skyhold proper was long and spanned a vast gulf between mountain peaks. We could see elves watching us from the parapets as we made our way across. The massive wooden doors groaned open as we got close and revealed a beautifully green and blooming courtyard. Grass carpeted the ground, flowers and herbs spread around the area and climbed the walls. The scent of the herbs and flowers tickled our senses and helped to immediately bring a smile to our faces. I couldn't help but notice how much warmer it was in the keep than it had been on the bridge and road. Solas stood in the middle of the courtyard draped with a heavy fur cloak and surrounded by a few dozen retainers and guards. He looked at the small procession with doubt until he noticed me. His expression changed to one of hesitant relief. Princess Oradum, he said as he lowered himself into a sweeping bow. If I had known it was you, I wouldn't have had you stay the night in the cold. You should have announced yourself. I bowed my head to him. Apologies. I thought one of my people had told you I would be coming with supplies for the foundation repairs the next time we came this way. He let out a huff of amusement. They did. They failed to neglect that there would be so many of you, however, and they made no mention of other royalty accompanying you. We dismounted and I approached. Solas, lowering myself into a curtsy, I apologize for that. It was out of my hands. As I told your man at the bridge, the assembly insisted I be escorted by a portion of the army, so that no harm came to me on the road. You are a precious jewel to your people, Princess. He smiled and clasped his hands behind his back. You have treated them fairly and have done much for them. I can understand their desire to keep you safe. Now, I ask what the King of Ferelden and the Lord and Lady of Ostagar are doing here with you? We have come to speak to you about how we might live together in peace, Merrick replied as he approached. We know of your desire to return the world to the way it was in ancient times, but we would like to be given the chance to dissuade you of this idea. Is that so? Solas asked, almost seeming intrigued by the idea. I suppose that if you know what my goal is, then you also know who and what I am. If we are to have such a discussion, it could take some time. We assumed it would take several days for us to all have our say. Triana stepped forward and smiled. How are you, Solas? I trust Skyhold has been treating you well? Skyhold is sufficient for my needs for now, Solas replied. Princess Oradum has been kind enough to keep us supplied with food, and now that she's brought people to repair certain areas of the keep, I suppose it will only grow more useful. But let's not keep you all out in the cold. Please, come this way. We'll go inside where it's warm and where you can more comfortably explain your proposal. Solas led us into Skyhold proper. The main hall soared up above us with large chandeliers lighting the area up with the help of dozens of sconces and candelabras. Long rugs covered the stone floor, and at the end of the hall sat a large table at the top of a few stairs. In Dragon Age Inquisition, the table would be replaced with a throne from which the main character would judge criminals and enemies alike. The table was a surprise. We were led to the left through a series of small hallways into a room that held a large table made from the center of a tree, with bark still clinging to its sides. Solas moved around to the head of the table and motioned for us to choose our seats. We all chose a chair and sat down. Once everyone seemed comfortable, Solas looked at Merrick. "King Merrick, would you like to begin?" Merrick cleared his throat and nodded. "First, understand that we came here in the hope that we could take our time to explain things. We wish to go into detail and make offers for you to consider. This conversation we have now will not be long enough to cover the issues we would like to go into." "Understandable," Solas nodded. "You believe that after many long discussions I might change my mind? I doubt it, but I will not deny your request. I am, if nothing else, willing to consider what you have to say." "You have our thanks," Merrick responded. "As for this conversation, know that we wish to join Princess Merida in providing your people with supplies until you can properly get on your feet. This is a harsh land you've claimed." "I did not so much as claim it as it was suggested to me by Princess Merida," Solas chuckled. "And I use the phrase as suggested lightly." "I did not wish to fight you," I said calmly. "And I do not hold your threat against you, Princess," Solas responded. "You were there to rescue and protect your friends. Your mission was admirable, and your explanation was sound. Skyhold has been a boon to my people. We have found its remote location rather comforting." "We would prefer that you rejoin us in Ostagar," Elfric said. "We don't want to see our people divided. We hope that we can convince you that this world that you created is worthy of continuing to exist. And that your descendants are worth nurturing and guiding with your wisdom and experience," Triana added. "We are your legacy," I chimed in. "Our people, humans, elves, and dwarves, have all adapted to this world over tens of thousands of years. We've lost so much knowledge, and we've learned how to interact with the world in different ways than before your decision. You may regret your actions, but those actions created a whole new world full of new kinds of people and creatures." "Do you think I haven't considered that?" Solas asked with a sigh. "I take no pleasure in my decision. In fact, I lament the need to do what I must. However, I am still sure of my decision. The Fade needs to be rejoined to the physical world. And that is why we're here," Merrick said staunchly. "We believe there are ways to live in this world together. I will not lie and say I understand the entirety of the details, but I grasp the grand scheme of it all. We appreciate the chance to speak to you about these possibilities." Solas sat back and looked at each of us. "I can see that you are all fervent in your desire to discuss these details. And I am not apathetic to your point of view. I can also see that you've all prepared your own points and offers. So I'll agree to listen to your petitions over the next few days. I don't believe you will change my mind, but I will keep an open mind when listening to you. Is that agreeable?" "I don't think we could ask for more," Merrick answered. "And if my mind is not changed, do we still have an agreement to work together in order to defeat the Darkspawn?" Solas looked at me. I smiled and nodded. "As I said before, we will need to work together. I have no intentions on being the one to break our alliance." "Then we are agreed, and we can speak honestly with one another," Solas smiled. He stood and clasped his hand behind his back. "I will have someone prepare rooms for you. Until then, I invite you all to enjoy the whole of the keep. I will summon you when it is time for lunch. Then we can begin our first talks. I trust this is acceptable?" We all stood, and Merrick nodded. "Thank you. That is agreeable. We were told our personal guards could enter the keep. May I ask that my sons and daughter-in-law be allowed in as well? This will be a fine example of diplomacy for them to learn from, and one of the last that I will be able to attend in such a fashion." We all stared at Merrick in surprise. He had basically announced that he was ready to retire from running his kingdom in practice and become king in name, and allow his heir to begin running affairs as regent in his stead. This brought a stunned silence to the room. Solas broke the silence with a simple bow of his head. "Of course, Your Majesty. It will no doubt be a fine learning experience for them. Now let us adjourn until after lunch." We all left the room and were shown to private quarters. Over the next few hours, the supplies and craftsmen arrived. as well as the personal guards and Serena, Alistair, and Kaelin. I worked with the dwarves to start the repairs on the keep's foundations while the others mostly relaxed. We spent that morning situating ourselves and falling into our roles. Serena hovered around Merrick, taking his counsel and discussing matters of Ferelden with him, while Alistair and Kaelin seemed more bored with the situation than anything else. Triana and Alfric met with the elves to catch up with them. We met with Solas, and King Merrick took the day to discuss his position, while we added in our opinions and clarifications on his behalf from our perspective. Those talks took us well into the night, and we had supper at the meeting table. When Solas declared the talks over for the evening, he asked that I stay behind to talk for a few minutes later. When the others had left, I looked at Solas. "What would you like to discuss?" "I do not pretend to see the animosity in those young men's eyes," Solas stated bluntly. I arched my brows. "Young men? You mean Alistair and Kaelin?" "King Merrick's sons, yes," Solas confirmed. "They seemed like they were appraising me, as if they were estimating their chances with me in a fight." "They're young men," I chuckled dismissively, "and they are aware of the threat you represent not only to their kingdom but to the world. They haven't had many chances to prove themselves, and they don't seem to be the type to want to prove themselves in diplomacy." "Such is the ego of young men," Solas mused. "But tell me truly, Princess, am I in danger? Have these others come in the hopes of stopping me one way or another? By hook or by crook, as it were?" I replied with a sigh. "I should also say that at no point in our travels did anyone mention attacking you. Not to me, at least. In any case, we're not carrying weapons around with us, so I doubt they'll be much of a threat to you or anyone else." "Nevertheless," Solas replied, "it makes me feel uneasy that they would watch me in such a way. None of the others watch me in this way." "Would it help if I told King Merrick that their behavior has offended us both, and that I do not wish for them to be a part of these talks from here out?" I asked him plainly. "You would ask such a thing for me?" "Of course," I replied with a smile. "Solas, we may be at odds, but I have given you my word that I will work to maintain our truce at least until 7 has been dealt with. This task falls within that promise. I want you to know that I am here in good faith." Solas smiled. The expression almost made me waver in my conviction. He sighed and pinched his nose. "You are a fine example of what is best in people, Princess. Would that all of Thedas were like you, I would seriously reconsider my approach." I bowed my head. "You flatter me." "Not at all," he smiled. Then his smile sobered once again. "But I must ask, for all your talk of maintaining our truce, what will happen if any of them do try to attack me? I doubt you can remain neutral in such a situation." "I will defend my friends," I answered honestly. "So you will side with them?" Solas grimaced. "I said I will defend them," I repeated. "I will do my best to keep them from harm." "You won't attack me? Surely they will see that as some sort of betrayal?" "I am a woman of my word," I looked at him sternly. "I will not be the one to break our truce." "That is reassuring," Solas said after a few moments of consideration. "That is all then. I simply wanted to see where you stood on the matter." I stood and curtsied to Solas. "I will let King Merrick know that his sons are longer welcome to the meetings. I will tell him that I am the one offended by their behavior and that their presence threatens to disrupt our talks." "I am in your debt, Princess," Solas smiled once again. We continued our meetings over the next few days. Alistair and Kaelin were not welcome into the room, so they stood outside guarding it along with a few elves and dwarves. Triana and Alfric took turns going over their opinions. Then it was my turn. At the end of each day, we would eat together and take time to relax. The repairs to the foundations went smoothly, and I would walk with Solas to inspect them. Each night, Solas would speak with me for a few minutes to reassure him that I would not attack him. This was our routine for nearly a week until the final day of our talks. Everyone sat around the table as we had finished our summarizations. Solas had been silent for some time as he considered everything that had been discussed over the week. Triana and Alfric seemed nervous with anxious anticipation. Serena seemed doubtful and was on the edge of her seat. Merrick sat passively as he had no real expectation of this coming to a positive end. I watched Solas curiously. Each night we discussed my dedication to our truce. He would question the points made that day. It made me wonder if he might genuinely be reconsidering his desire. A loud sound coming from the door broke the silence. We all looked to the door as shouts and alarms began to ring out. "What is this? Is this your doing?" Solas asked Merrick. "My doing?" Merrick snapped. "We've been in this room for a week. How could this be my doing?" "There is an army outside my walls. Have you finally decided to attack?" Solas turned his anger to me. "Don't be ridiculous. We should be out there helping the others with whatever's going on, not sitting here hurling accusations," I shouted back. I stood quickly and turned to go to the door. "Stop!" Solas shouted. A flare of light erupted from his eyes, and I was frozen in place. I couldn't move and began to panic as I felt my body stiffen, and then nothing. I felt the stone all around me. I could hear through it, through the vibrations. I could hear Merrick and the others shouting in protest and shock. Solas had turned me to stone, but made the mistake of thinking I was dealt with. I let my senses flow through the stone to where I knew our weapons were. I pulled them down into the stone and through the keep's stone foundation and floor, so they jumped up before the others. Merrick engaged Solas immediately. Serena and Elfric began firing arrows to keep Solas off guard, while Triana began to cast spells at the ancient elf. I stepped out of the stone prison he'd made of me and picked up my staff. I glared at Solas as he defended against Merrick's barrage of attacks. "You attacked me without provocation. We are not the ones who started this." Solas ducked a swing from Merrick's sword and quickly brought a magical barrier up to deflect arrows fired by Serena and Elfric. "If not you, then who?" "You should have asked me before you tried turning me to stone," I growled. "I am the stone. I could have told you that there are monsters attacking the keep. But now I see that you never trusted me. You never trusted us. This was always going to be how things ended, no matter how we tried to work with you." Solas shouted in pain as Merrick scored a glancing hit on his side. The others were doing an excellent job of stopping him from casting any potent spells. "This world is wrong, and I will end it one way or the other. And while you fight us, your people are dying to those monsters," Triana shouted. "My people," Solas scoffed. "A means to an end only. My people would not willingly and ignorantly mark themselves as slaves. I will rend this world asunder, and you will all regret standing in my—" I willed the stone to open beneath one of Solas' feet and closed around it once it had sunk in. I charged in, drawing my greatsword and joining Merrick in attacking our enemy. "You talk too much," I spat. "And you rely too much on magic when facing a foe your people could not defeat alone. And as you said, you are alone because those outside aren't your people." Spells clashed as Solas expertly wove some into his movements. Triana and I did what we could to counter them, but his power was great. Lightning, fire, ice, and other elements and effects flashed and dashed through the room. The battle in the room was furious, but the sounds outside were beginning to sound desperate. We heard Alistair shouting for Kaelin, and the cry took Merrick's attention from the battle for a moment. That moment gave Solas all the time he needed to release a burst of arcane energy that sent everyone flying back. Serena slammed into the stone wall. Merrick cried out as his arm snapped against the table. Triana was knocked unconscious as her head clapped against the floor. Elfric pushed himself up from the floor as I did the same. He moved over to check on Triana as I prepared to attack once again. "You're finished," Solas said with a tone of finality. "Your strongest allies are out of this fight, Princess. Now what will you do?" I looked from Solas back to my friends. When I looked back at Solas, my eyes were glowing a furious lyrium blue. Now I'll stop holding back. I wasn't going to endanger them. But now more of my friends on the other side of that door are in danger. So now I'll end this. "You think you can defeat me alone?" Solas quipped. "I could have killed you from the moment we met," I snarled. "You are arrogant and have carried your arrogance with you since you were considered a god. But you have forgotten how powerful your ancient foes are. Now I will remind you." "You are no—" Solas' voice was cut off as a hand of stone reached up from the floor and grabbed him by the neck. He worked a spell to shatter the stone, but two more arms, one from the wall and another from the ceiling, reached out to grab his wrists. "No what?" I asked as I closed the distance between us. I stopped just in front of him and stared up at him, fury evident on my features. "I am no Titan? When my people lived symbiotically with the Titans, you thought of us as ugly, lump, mindless drones that did their bidding. You didn't understand that we were all one and the same. You thought that after you separated the Fade from the rest of the world, and that connection was severed, that we became harmless, that the Titans would no longer be a threat. One of the stone hands snapped. Solas' left arm. He let out a strained hiss of air in pain. You didn't think the Titans would always watch over their children? Now his right arm was snapped and tears ran down his face. You thought they were like you? That they would look at their children and see how they were no longer the people they used to be and scorn them like you did? I reached up and my hand rested on his cheek as my anger grew. Look me in the eyes and see what else is inside me. Solas looked down at me, and through his tears I could see his realization. His revulsion was palpable. You see it, don't you? I smirked. One of the souls of the Evanuris, June's soul specifically, given to me by Myth all herself when she learned that I was going to oppose you. I have her soul within me. Soon she and I will be the only remnants of your wretched pantheon. Just imagine it. A Titan holds the soul of someone you would truly consider one of your people, and you never noticed because for all your talk of alliances and reassurances, you always looked down on me. On all of us. Solas snorted defiantly as his skin began to go pale from the lack of air. I lowered my hand and wrapped my fingers around the wolf jaw that hung from a rope around his neck. I snatched the makeshift necklace from his neck. I think I'll keep this after you're gone. Something to remember your arrogance by. Now, I'll release your soul to enter the Fade. That should please you, yes? Knowing that your soul is trapped in a prison of souls of your own making for all eternity. A fitting end, I think. I turned and moved to check on Merrick as the stone hands ripped Solas apart. His limbs were torn from his body while he opened his mouth to scream, but the hand around his neck denied him the air to make a sound. When he finally died, I left him hanging there by the neck. King Merrick, are you all right? I asked as I helped him up into a chair. Don't bother with me, Merrick waved me off. Check outside. Help my sons. I nodded and moved to the door as Alfric helped Triana and Serena recover. When I opened the doors, I gasped. The sight that greeted me was horrifying. Farron and Alistair turned to us, covered in blood and gore. Kaylin's body, which had been resting against the door, slumped into the doorway. Only a few of the guards remained alive, and among them the harvesters from Amgarek. Oh no, I whispered as I dropped to my knees to cradle Kaylin's body close. My love, are you all right? Farron asked as he moved to check on me. My wife, my father? Alistair asked. They're injured, but they'll recover, I responded to Alistair. Alistair rushed into the room to check on his family as Farron knelt beside me. He placed his forehead to the side of my head. Tell me you're all right. I tried getting to you, but there were so many of these things. I turned my head and kissed his cheek. I'm fine, but poor Kaylin. I could hear Merrick beginning to weep. Alistair had no doubt given him the news. The next few hours were spent recovering from the battle. We gathered the dead and built a pyre for them. Kaylin was preserved and wrapped to be brought back to Ferelden. The remaining elves that were loyal to Solas were chained and brought to the camp. We left Skyhold and stayed in camp that night. It was a somber, bitter evening for everyone, most of all for King Merrick. We didn't eat together that evening. Those who had been in Skyhold simply took the evening to recover. Triana made her rounds to use her healing magic on everyone she could. As I sat by the fire, Farron by my side, one of my guards poked his head into the tent. Princess, Lady Theron would like an audience. We said we didn't want to be disturbed, Farron barked at the guard. No, I said quickly. It's all right. Show her in. As you command, Princess, the guard replied. You said you didn't want to talk to anyone. Farron looked at me. I know what she wants to talk about, I sighed. Might as well get it out of the way. Serena slipped into the tent and offered a curtsy of greeting. Thank you for seeing me. I know none of us is really in the mood to talk, but I had some questions. If you're wondering about if I will still back your claim to the throne, I doubt that there's much need for that anymore, I said as I looked up at her. No, you're right about that, Serena agreed. However, I got a look at those monsters, and they're from Amgarak. Didn't you say you went to Amgarak? I did, and I reclaimed it for the dwarves, I replied. Then you would have encountered the harvesters, Serena said. Strange that they should end up here when we were going to fight Solas, don't you think? Strange? I asked. No, I don't think so. I brought them with us, after all. They were an excellent excuse to start a fight. How? How did you bring them with us? I certainly never saw them, Serena said. I brought them through the stone, I smirked, just like I did with our weapons. They killed Kaelan, Serena moaned. Yes, I nodded and looked at her seriously. And a few guards, just so it didn't look suspicious. It took Serena a few moments to register what I had said. She stared at me in disbelief. What did you say? You heard me, I replied, the truth hanging between us. The harvesters weren't for Solas, they were for Kaelan. You wanted to be queen, but you wanted me to back you because I owed you the favor after handing me Guarin. But you don't owe me anything, Serena protested. You bought Guarin with your own money. If you were going to back me at this point, it would be because you believe I would run the country better than Honora. I nodded. You're right, and I have come to believe that. However, nothing you did or said would have changed Merrick's mind. Kaelan is a true-born son, and the eldest. Regardless of his inability to rule, he would have been crowned king. Now he's no longer an obstacle to your aspirations. You're welcome. By the Maker, Merida, you murdered Kaelan just so I could become queen? I laughed and shook my head. Not at all. I removed Kaelan so that you could become queen, and you would understand that I only released about 50 harvesters, out of hundreds. The threat was implicit. It filled the air between us. I had let loose only a fraction of the harvesters I had control of. I made sure that they were able to get to Kaelan and some of the guards by sensing their movements in the stone, while Alistair was kept safe by Farron using his abilities. With Kaelan's death, Serena and Alistair's rise was assured. But because I was the one who ensured their rise, Serena would now owe me a favor. She would also understand that if she didn't work with me when I wanted her to, more harvesters could always be let loose. Serena stood there frozen with the horrible truth. She tried to remain composed, but her eyes were filled with barely contained fear. She took a breath to compose herself. I understand. Thank you, Merida. I hope our friendship can continue to flourish as we work together to bring our kingdoms closer together. So do I smiled and bowed my head. Was there anything else you wanted to speak about? No, Serena shook her head. I'll leave you to rest. I smiled, and Serena took her leave. The journey back was quiet and filled with hurt. We all felt horrible for King Merrick. I especially felt remorse with what I had to do. In the end, Merrick brought Kaelan back to Denerim and burned him there. Triana and Alfric went back to Ostagar to tell them the news of Solas' death. Farron and I went home to Orzammar, ready to report to Father that the threat was ended. Little did we know that an announcement had been made in our absence.